Good morning, students. Continuing with the civil disobedience movement, now we are at the end of it. But one thing very important with civil disobedience movement, which was launched by Mahatma Gandhi in 1930, made it very clear that yes, there were a lot of fault lines which had started becoming very evident, and they started coming out in the forefront. We Indians had been fighting against the British rule for a very long period of time, and I've said this time and again that yes, it was almost a 190-year-old struggle actually. But then, when Indians had been fighting British together to get rid of them, as long as that was going on, we more or less were a very united lot of people. Yes, the British did pursue the policy of divide and rule, but it was morely at the upper segment of the society, the political class, the politician class, the representatives, at least the people who claim to be the representatives. But at the ground level, at the level of you and I, things were more or less very united. But once it started becoming quite obvious that now it would be just a matter of time that the British would leave India, and it would be very difficult for them to manage India anymore, at least after the First World War had ended. The British had lost a huge amount of political power around the world. And now the fault lines started emerging because once different and diverse groups within India they saw and they realized that yes, now the British were about to leave, then their own very individual and parochial, or you call it their very tribal kind of their interests and self-interests started coming into the forefront, that what would be about my people and my people and my group and my religion and my faith, and then my territory and my kingdom and my rule, everything started. It was now only about my and me. It was not about India, and no one was not out talking about the interest of India as a whole. Now suddenly we were again back to me and my. And source D, if you look at, especially this is when, since we are talking about the problems, especially we are highlighting the problem which we were having with Muslims, because you have to understand that Muslims were the biggest group within India and the Indian subcontinent after Hindus. So naturally, and they were huge in numbers. So naturally, their opinion mattered. What they thought about it mattered, whether they agreed with us or disagreed with us. In both the cases it really mattered to us. And if you look at this last paragraph, when the civil disobedience movement started, there was thus an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust between the communities. Alienated from Congress, large sections of Muslims could not respond to the call for a united struggle. Many Muslim leaders had intellectually who had expressed their concerns about the status of Muslims as a minority within India. They feared that the culture and identity of minorities would be submerged under the domination of a Hindu majority. And as we had already discussed in our previous videos, how Muslims did come up with certain demands, because partition was immediately not an option for anyone. But then in 1927 an effort was made, but it did not yield results at all. Okay. And in 1928 we Indians, under the leadership of Pandit Motilal Nehru, we rejected the proposal that the Muslims had made about separate electorate, because we found it to be a very divisive method, because it would be a sham democracy, it would not be a true democracy at all. And that is how we started drifting, at least we, that would mean Hindus and Muslims, we started drifting and we started going our separate ways. And if you look at source D, just the first paragraph, you'll have to read this. I want you to read this, of course. But the first paragraph I'm particularly picking up. In 1930, Sir Muhammad Iqbal, the president of Muslim League, reiterated the importance of separate electorates in spite of the proposal that was rejected in 1928. He again in 1930 he reiterated that yes, They have not forgotten about that proposal of separate electorate, and in their opinion, it still was the most promising method to keep Hindus and Muslims united, though now Hindus had completely rejected that proposal. Separate electorate for the Muslims as an important safeguard for their minority political interests. This statement is supposed to have provided the intellectual justification for the Pakistan demand that came up in the subsequent years. The subsequent years would mean, that is, in 1930, Muhammad Iqbal. Now, who was Muhammad Iqbal and why is it important? Why have we picked up Muhammad Iqbal? Students, you have to understand, and that's what we have been discussing. Hindus and Muslims had been waging the battle against and the war against the British in a very, very united sort of manner for many, many, many years. It was only after the First World War, that is after 1919, that the fault lines started appearing. Now, it is the same Muhammad Iqbal, that is Sir Muhammad Iqbal, who wrote Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara. It is impossible now to believe that this person who had written Sari Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara, something which we sing even today in India, he was the one who ultimately became one of the pillars of Pakistan demand, along with Muhammad Ali Jinnah. That yes, it is people like him who saw the future of Muslims within a united India. They started looking at options which was completely out of India. They started looking for options which was not going to ensure peace and harmony in India. And in subsequent years, that is in 1940, it was in Lahore when the Muslim League and a lot of Muslim intellectuals collected and came together in Lahore and demanded, and officially rather demanded, Pakistan as a land of Muslims. So this is you must read source D. It is very revealing actually here, and it gives you an idea about the thought which was there. And if you have any questions, you can always ask me. The sense of collective belonging. Here you have the image of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, one of the tallest leaders of the freedom struggle before Mahatma Gandhi, of course, came into prominence. Yes, nationalism, the sense of collective belonging. Now, what is nationalism? Even in the first chapter, that is, when we were studying about nationalism in Europe, we had clearly seen that nationalism, in pure true sense, essentially meant your love for your motherland, and that inspires different sentiments and different emotions and different actions from you. Deep within you have a love for the country, and love for the country would also then naturally comes to the people who live in that country. Nationalism spreads when people begin to believe that they are all part of the same nation, where they discover some unity that binds them together. But how did the nation become a reality in the minds of people? How did people belonging to different communities, religions, or language groups develop a sense of collective belonging? This sense of collective belonging came partly through the experience of united struggles, but there was also a variety of cultural processes through which nationalism captured people's imagination. History and fiction, folklore and songs, popular prints and symbols all played a part in the making of nationalism. The identity of the nation, as you know, is most often symbolized in a figure or image. This helps create an image with which people can identify the nation. It was the 20th century, with the growth of nationalism, that the identity of India came to be visually associated with the image of Bharat Mata. The image was first created by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in the 1870s, and he wrote Vande Mataram as a hymn to the motherland. Later, it was included in his novel Anandamath and widely sung during the Swadeshi movement in Bengal. Moved by the Swadeshi movement, Abanindranath Tagore painted his famous image of Bharat Mata. Now, students, you have to understand one very important fact here, that reading these paragraphs, that gives you an impression as if the nation, the concept of India as a nation is a very recent one. That is, it probably started in the 19th century itself, when we were waging the struggle against the British. But then this is not so, though they do not write it here, but it gives an impression, and many a times it gives an impression as if the concept of India was never there. But then you have to understand, India is an extremely old civilization. Okay, it is an extremely old civilization, and the culture and the tradition, the people, whatever we follow today, everything comes to us from our forefathers, who and our great forefathers, who were there 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago. We as a civilization, we come from there. I haven't come from Japan, neither have you, right? No one has, I know of till now, who can claim that his grandfather or his great grandfather was born in Norway or Sweden, for that matter. All of us, our great grandfathers, all of us were born here. We've always had as the idea of India was always strong within us, culturally, geographically, and territorially, whereby even if you read about the conquest of Alexander the Great to India, his adventurism, military adventures in India, even then people wanted to give a fitting reply to Alexander as a united India. Mahabharat, Ramayana, all these things tell you, which have been written thousands of years ago, or at least we have, which we know of thousands of years ago. Even they had that concept of India as a united India. Otherwise, the name of Mahabharat, right, which was written hundreds and hundreds of years ago, now that is Mahabharat, right? Bharat. So it was always there, right? But then a, a country which sees a very different kind of history all the time. Something, a new chapter begins, the other one ends, and the other fresh one begins. From Chanakya to Chandragupta Maurya to Buddhism comes to India, then the rise of Hindu prominence, and then the Mughals come to India. They rule for another 700, 800 years. Then the British come to India. So naturally, you have different chapters of Indian history which keep coming and keep adding up. But that doesn't mean that every chapter is talking about a different